Of course, NVIDIA is getting all of the attention recently with its breakout earnings release and the announcement of the stock split. But Palantir is also a popular artificial intelligence stock, and many investors that are considering AI stocks are considering Palantir as well. But which one is the better AI stock to buy today? Is it Palantir or is it NVIDIA? I'll answer that question in this video, comparing these two AI stocks on revenue, on profit margin, on cash flow, and putting that all together and looking at their valuation difference and coming to a conclusion on which one I think is the better AI stock to buy today for long-term investors. So let's get started with a revenue growth comparison. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. All right, so what I have here is a chart of NVIDIA and Palantir and their revenue growth quarterly going back all the way to 2020. Of course, we only have data from Palantir starting late 2020, and we have more data on NVIDIA than we do Palantir, since Palantir IPO'd more recently than NVIDIA did. So looking at their revenue growth, what we notice is NVIDIA has surpassed Palantir in revenue growth in almost every quarter going back until 2021. There were a few quarters when Palantir outgrew NVIDIA during that slump of late 2022, early 2023. Can you remember that? That seems so long ago now that NVIDIA was experiencing these declines, these revenue decreases year over year. Remember why that was? Back in those days, NVIDIa's gaming business, to be precise, was reliant somewhat to cryptocurrency prices because people were using NVIDIA's chips to mine cryptocurrencies. And since cryptocurrency prices had collapsed, that hurt demand for NVIDIA's GPUs. And then at the same time, you had the cyclical gap for gaming because people were spending more time away from home at those times. And NVIDIA was struggling in those quarters. And that seems like so long ago. It seems like NVIDIA has been in this super stage of growth forever now, even though it hasn't been all that long that NVIDIA is benefiting from this surge in demand from artificial intelligence. Palantir, meanwhile, was experiencing decelerating revenue growth. It re-accelerated that most recently. Palantir's AI bootcamps has been working very well for the company. It's signing up a lot of customers. It's gaining a lot of customer interest. And Palantir has done a great job of broadening its business availability. We all know Palantir has done a great job with governments. That's because governments have deeper pockets and they can afford Palantir services. Palantir is the best in class in its category, but the trouble is that they are so expensive that not very many enterprises can afford Palantir. Governments can afford Palantir, but enterprises, only the biggest of the enterprises right now. But Palantir is making themselves more accessible. They're finding ways to broaden out their availability, and it's working well. They're gaining great traction among businesses, and that's going to open up another category of growth for Palantir, given that there's so many more businesses than there are governments. So that opens up the horizon that much more. So still, over the next few quarters, NVIDIA is going to far surpass Palantir in terms of revenue growth. But maybe after, I would say, 8 quarters or maybe 12 quarters, so in like 2 or 3 years, after this initial surge of revenue growth for NVIDIA, they may reach similar levels in terms of revenue growth in a couple of years. NVIDIA's AI surge is not going to last forever. This is just the initial surge in spending from enterprises building out their AI capabilities, and then their growth rate will settle back down to a much, much lower level. It's not going to grow at 262%. It's not going to grow at that rate for a very long time, not anything more than a year or maybe 2 years at the most. So the next category I wanted to compare these two on is the operating profit margin. And here again, NVIDIA has a big lead over Palantir, 59.84% in operating profit margin for NVIDIA. of all of the companies that I follow, NVIDIA is second place in this metric on operating profit margin. And I follow over 100 companies. And the company that's in first place, if you're curious, is Visa, and at roughly 67%. And Visa is, to my awareness, the best, most profitable company in the world in terms of this metric. NVIDIA is second, according to my knowledge. If you know of a company that's more profitable than this, please comment on it, because I haven't found one that is. Now, Palantir has done a great job increasing its operating profit margin. It's up to 8.43% now. It was negative just a few short years ago, and it's done a great job keeping costs under control while revenues have increased. I wouldn't be surprised if Palantir's operating profit margin keeps moving higher over these next few years. Although one thing to be aware of is Palantir management said that they're going to hire more people because they see so much more demand coming to them. They're going to hire more people to fulfill that demand. So I'm going to be curious to see if that increase in hiring is going to impact their operating profit margin, or are they going to generate enough revenue growth even beyond the people that they need to hire to still boost their profitability. That's something to keep an eye out for from Palantir. So similar to operating profit margin, I wanted to look at cash flow from operations to sales. And this shows a difference and improvement for Palantir, because Palantir uses significant sums of stock-based compensation, which is a non-cash expense. So it makes its operating profit margin look much worse than its cash flow from operations. Looking at cash flow from operations, still NVIDIA has a big lead, 50% to 28%, but Palantir is much closer when we use this metric instead of operating profit margin. But the downside from using stock-based compensation is that it does dilute shareholders, and you can see the average number of shares outstanding for NVIDIA has been relatively flat to declining over the years, while Palantir has been diluting shareholders aggressively, going from roughly 1.8 billion shares outstanding in 2021 all the way up to 2.4 billion shares outstanding as of the most recent update. And that's what you get when you pay your employees stock-based compensation instead of paying them salaries and wages as cash. And so that's the downside. Sure, you retain more cash, but the downside is you dilute shareholders, which if you dilute shareholders, that means whatever amount of profit your company generates, you're now splitting that among more shares, and that's decreasing the earnings per share. And finally, I wanted to compare these two on valuation. We noticed on nearly every metric we looked at, NVIDIA was better than Palantir, way better than Palantir in most metrics, right? Better profit margin, better cash flow from operations, better revenue growth, less shareholder dilution, all of which working in NVIDIA's favor. And then if we look at the valuation, NVIDIA is also cheaper than Palantir, trading at a forward price to earnings of 32.7 compared to 53 for Palantir. So for me, this is a relatively easy decision, given that NVIDIA is so much better than Palantir on so many of those critical metrics, and given that it's selling at a cheaper valuation, I would go with NVIDIA here as my better choice for the better AI stock to buy today. Before I let you go, let me tell you about the greatest deal on YouTube. With just a click of a button, you can get free financial analysis from a professor with decades of investing experience. So what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.